All right, good afternoon. I think we'll get started. My name is Darren Lapomi. I'm the Associate Dean for Students and also a professor in nanoengineering and chemical engineering. I think these grad and postdoc talks are actually professionally my favorite thing to do in my job. I've been doing this for about 6 years. I have a big catalog of past talks on YouTube, and I'm going to put this one on YouTube there as well, in case you want to see anything that you didn't that may be useful to you. So what we're going to talk about today is the transition from classroom learning to research in the lab. And this is a big transition in life, sort of equivalent to like getting married or having a kid or like moving across the country. You don't really know how your life is going to change before you decide to make that transition. And so the transition occurs sometime between maybe first year of grad school to sort of second year of grad school, where you go from primarily learning in the classroom to doing stuff in the lab. And it's really weird that we have this educational model at all, where undergraduate training is entirely in the classroom, and then you go into the lab and the metrics for success and everything that you do is completely different. You're reading books and studying, and then all of a sudden you're mixing stuff and programming stuff, and it's completely different. You have, in one case, you have equations and multiple choice exams and group projects where there basically is an answer to something in research where there may not be an answer. So every transition in life fails in some way to prepare you for the next transition. So when you go from high school to undergrad, I think one of the biggest transitions that you probably noticed is time management. So in high school, you have a lot of hand-holding. You're in those classes for like 6-7 hours a day, and you're meeting, depending on whether you had block scheduling or not, either 3 or 4 or 5 times per week. Then in college, you're down to 2 times per week, sometimes 3 times, and the stuff just moves way faster. The instructors don't repeat very much. It's just a new topic every time. And I think a lot of us that ended up in STEM fields kind of found high school like kind of easy compared to college for that reason. And there are so few grades in undergrad compared to high school, where it seemed like you had like multiple assignments every week that you handed in, like, oh, check plus 100 or whatever. And then in undergrad, it's like midterm final. Maybe the homework will be graded, depending on how big the class is. It's very little repetition. Then you go from undergrad to grad school. And when you're in grad school, the coursework is basically done after the first year. It is self-directed in a way that undergrad is not. So when you're taking classes, so undergrad all the way through the first year of grad school, you kind of know what you have to do. You have to study, you have to learn how your own brain takes in information. That's the extent to which it's self-directed. But otherwise, the point is to get high score on the test, to learn the material well enough to repeat it on an exam or a lab report. Grad school has no grades. In fact, there's an old joke that if you have higher than a B average in your classes in grad school, you're not spending enough time in the lab. Basically, you need to spend enough time in courses in order to not lose your financial support, right? That's what they say. I don't think anyone should do that. You should work hard in your classes. But there are no grades in grad school. In fact, I'm always amazed when I'm teaching a graduate class when people get so upset about getting a B or a B minus on something, and I'm like, no one is ever going to see that grade. It's not like your employer. The employers in engineering companies don't even contact your PI as a reference 90% of the time. They definitely don't have time to waste to look through your transcript like, oh, an A minus in heat transfer. Stay away from that student. There are sometimes unclear metrics. Okay, so what do they care about? Well, they care about your ability to do teamwork, your ability to be curious about what they're doing, your ability to solve problems, what you did in your thesis work, although sometimes that's not even that important. They're paying for reliability, but they're definitely not paying for grades. There can be unclear metrics. One of the reasons that there are unclear metrics in grad school is because they're set by like one person, and that's the PI. Ideally, they would be set by departmental standards, which they are to some extent, and maybe the expectations of your committee members as well. But usually, once you're on the same page with the PI, things are become either clear or less clear in bad circumstances. Then when you go from grad school, and I'll say grad school and postdoc, how many postdocs in the audience? Okay, just one today. Oh, we got to increase our marketing to postdocs. So once you go from grad school to postdoc and you go for your job, there is another set of transitions. So your hours are more set in a job. So you might be expected to be in the office or at least be on call at your home office, depending on your hybrid work schedule, which is a thing now, at different at set times. You work on larger teams. So in grad school, you're working in teams of often one, sometimes two. Sometimes you have one or two other students or postdocs in other labs. And your communication skills in your job are going to be a lot more important. A lot of times it's what resources do you need from this other department, or how as an R&D engineer are you communicating with your upstream marketing team or your your product management team that says, look, these group of customers want this kind of feature. How can you incorporate that kind of functionality in whatever product you're engineering? And usually your product are goal oriented, and the time horizons tend to be a bit shorter in industry, depending on where you are on the R&D trajectory, like where your position is within that company. And you also might have management roles. There's more hierarchy in a job than there is in grad school, where it's kind of like PI and then maybe postdoc and then, first through sixth year grad students and then maybe undergrads, but it's a little bit less defined. Thinking about coursework. Not every course is going to apply to your research, but you don't know which ones will and which ones won't. So you're taking these courses, the department, program, whatever you are in has chosen a set of core courses deliberately because they think that they will undergird your research in your thesis topic. But it's true that not every course is going to be applicable to what you're doing at any given moment. But you're not going to be able to predict what your work is going to be like in 5 or 10 years. You may go back and pick out information that you learned previously, or say, oh, that's familiar, and even though you forgot the details, at least you know where to look for it or whom to ask about it. So never underestimate the power of a fundamental course in being useful later on. Also, being in courses that are not related to your research, you might wish to incorporate some of that knowledge into your research. And I've done that as a researcher, as a PI, with every course that I've taught. I have definitely brought in information I learned as a result of teaching that course into my research. And I'll give you a couple examples later on. So coursework is important in terms of fundamentals, so how people are supposed to talk in a given field, like what jargon, what words are used. You have to know what the rules are before you can break them. So they talk about innovation and iterating your ideas And in a course where you see the progression of ideas, particularly in a graduate survey course, you see what's been done, and then you can kind of get an idea of what hasn't been done and what you might want to do that's new. Sometimes you'll see these very comical papers that come out from a field outside of your field, and there was, I don't know if this is if this was a joke, but there was like some high-profile medical journal like article that came out that said we can figure out the area under a curve by approximating the number of rectangles and then multiplying by the average area of the rectangles, and they rediscovered integral calculus. So get to know your faculty and TAs. So your coursework is a lot of times where you can develop research collaborations, or sometimes if you haven't joined a lab yet, if there are first-year grad students who are still rotating around, you can get to know who you might want to work for. The way to do this is to go to office hours. So go to the TA's office hours, go to the professor's office hours. I think office hours, two underutilized resources in graduate research or in the university system. One, office hours, and two, dissertation committee members. Because a lot of times there will be conflicts between grad students and PIs, but there are these four other people that are also institutionally committed to your success, and we never get talked to until the day of the exam, and then the door closes and the defender is kicked out, and then the PI says, really been having some trouble with this student. You have to help me here. And then the rest of us four, like, what? How come we never heard of this before? We would have done something to help. So anyway, that's a sidebar, but that's something we should be wary of. So get to know faculty and TAs, find out their research interests. Your coursework may suggest research questions. Some courses, if they are team-based or have a presentation component or a final project component, might give you presentation and public speaking skills or contribute to the development of those skills, and also teamwork skills, and also literature searching and writing, which are going to be hugely important to your research. And if it's a lab, they will provide basic lab skills. Pretty obvious for that last one. Do you need courses to do research? So this is the no column. I didn't mean to say, no, you don't need courses. This is a column. I have it organized that way. You do not need courses to work with your hands. You can get a high school student or a middle school student to volunteer in the lab who has not taken calculus, who doesn't know anything about Python programming, who doesn't know how to 3D print something, but you can teach them something that is mechanical, that they can do with their hands. To wash glassware, it's a little bit of a joke. To repair equipment, if you are taught step by step how to take apart a vacuum pump and reassemble it, you'll be able to do that again, right? And clean out all the gaskets and replace stuff. And to do other types of rote tasks. To do, pipetting, to put stuff in a 96-well plate, to program something fairly basic, and even many non-rote tasks. So humans are capable of this thing called human-machine learning, or just learning. That's where if you do something enough times, you can figure out how to do it, right? And even if it's relatively sophisticated, you can train somebody to do it. Do you need courses to do research? So partially, yes, to understand the literature. A lot of times if you're just in an environment where you're hearing the same words over and over again, like, I know what that word is, I know what that word is, and you open a paper and you're like, okay, I can kind of see what's going on there, but you don't necessarily get the depth that's inherent in the paper, the stuff that's not written. There's a lot of effective complexity in a paper, so where a word might mean 10 words to an expert, somebody that had studied that for their career. And same thing goes to write papers in your field. You can write a paper entirely in jargon, and it probably won't be a very good paper. But if you write it based only on phenomenologically what you did and what you saw, there are those types of papers, and those are perfectly legit without getting into the fundamentals and the mechanism. But the yes column is much bigger. You need courses to understand what you're doing, to come up with your own projects. I got a lot of undergraduate researchers, not recent undergraduate researchers, but in the past, who say, can I have my own project? Before they join the lab, can I have my own project? Okay, so I've been doing research in labs for 19 years. I started in undergrad, in my second year of undergrad in 2003, summer after sophomore year in undergrad. And I had my own project, but my grad student mentor kind of designed all the steps for me and said, carry this out. Back then, if I had a new idea, the chances would be 1 in 10,000 that it would actually be relevant and work. Even at my best now, I've been a PI for 10 and a half years. I've been in scientific research for 19 years. Even at my best, only 1 in 10 of my ideas is going to work. So when somebody comes in without much coursework and with no lab work and they say, can I have my own project? Just statistically, what are the odds that they're going to pick something that is going to work and be relevant to the field and also have a sound scientific basis? You need courses to do research because you need to be able to answer questions. So when people ask you something at a conference or at a group meeting and you don't know the fundamentals, you can get embarrassed very quickly. And this is a piece of something that I learned from teaching for the last 10 and a half years, is that here is the level at which you're presenting the material. And here is your depth of knowledge. And ideally, you have a depth of knowledge that fluctuates, but it's pretty deep. If somebody asks questions in this range, you can answer at multiple different levels. But there are some times when what you wrote on the board or what you showed on the screen is exactly everything you know about that topic, and it flatlines. So if in this moment you're extremely vulnerable to looking like you don't know what you're talking about if someone asks you a question. So in those moments, you say, where what's on the board is exactly everything I know about the topic, you say, that's a great question. I don't know, but I'll get back to you I'll get back to the class by email. So hopefully I'm not saying something totally horrifying by admitting that does happen to professors. If you're taking courses, you know where you've seen something before and where you can look it up, and also to know whom to ask, previous instructors and TAs. Even if it was a long time ago, you still might have the book on your shelf. So what courses should you take in grad school, or even as a postdoc as an audit? So the core classes, of course, electives in your nominal area. So your degree program will have a list of approved electives, but there will also be courses outside of that list that you can get a petition to have added to your degree. And usually, if it's a technical course and there's no reason why not, yeah, they'll add it. In grad school, I wanted to get some non-technical writing course counted for credit, and they told me no, and they were right to tell me no. One strategy that some people have used to great effect, because a lot of times you don't know what direction your research is going to go for a couple of years, or you might not know what sort of side area might actually become a serious part of your thesis, is to save some of your electives for after your thesis gets going. So you might take a course in your third or fourth year because you want to create some depth in that knowledge so that when you talk about it, you have some theoretical grounding. So you don't know what you can't possibly know. You can't predict the future. Sometimes I do like meditation, and they tell you to focus on the breath. And even though you just took a breath, and you try to feel like, how is that next breath going to feel? And you didn't quite get it right. Like you tried to feel it before it happened, and then it happens, and it's some aspect of it surprises you. So what odds do we actually have of like knowing what direction our thesis is going to take? Electives later on in your graduate career can break up the tedium. Courses can also be fun, especially if there's not a lot riding on it. I would suggest that you take it for a grade. The reason is that audits, unless you're really disciplined about studying and you're very self-motivated, audits are hard to get to work. At least they were for me, because you don't take the tests. There's nothing riding on it. I think the fear of that grade is a great motivator to sit down and learn something. And I would suggest taking a mix of fundamental and survey courses. So the survey courses, where the professor basically goes through literature and various topics, maybe one or two of those types of courses would be very useful. Sometimes surveys feel like you're cheating, like you're getting out of taking a hard class by taking a survey type class. But it gives your brain a chance to breathe, and it gives you a legitimate reason to look outside of your exact field of research. Experimentalists, I would suggest taking a class in computer science or coding if you don't have a background in it, because I found many times there are things that I wish I knew how to do. They often involve coding. The last serious coding I did was when I was in middle school, trying to figure out how the games that came with Windows 3.1 worked. And CSE students maybe take a class in materials mechanics, bio, robotics, some other field that CSE could be used in. Once your courses are over, so there will be a day when you've taken your last class, and after that, you may feel like there's no legitimate way to learn anything new again outside of research. Like, when am I ever going to have the chance to sit in a class and really learn something in a rigorous way? And we think, what are some other ways to learn stuff while we're in research? So there are review-style articles, which are okay to learn a new topic. But you can't really learn anything fundamental by reading original research papers because they assume too much knowledge. It's really hard to learn that way. I would say that learning from single author monographs are a book on a topic that was written by one person or maybe two people is the best way to learn a topic, because the writing assumes that you've read the previous chapter. There's a lot of callbacks in it. They use a consistent set of nomenclature. They use the same variables from chapter to chapter, which is not guaranteed in the literature, and it's even not guaranteed when you have a multi-author book that's written by a different group of people for every chapter. It's almost like someone's taken a bunch of review articles and stapled them together. Those books, in my opinion, are worthless, because usually how people get to write those books is that they've already written a review article in chemical reviews or something, and then the editor, like Elsevier or Springer or something, says, can you contribute to this journal? And then they submit a crappy version of what they already submitted to the peer-reviewed journal. So how to maintain your thirst for knowledge. I have some feelings about whether auditing works, but if you don't care, like maybe you only want to get 25% of knowledge out of it, you can by all means audit. Audit usually means you pay for the class, but you can ask the professor if you want to sit in, and they might let you do it. There's also YouTube. YouTube has a lot of great stuff on it. Most intro courses in engineering have multiple versions on YouTube, and some of them can be really good, especially if you've never taken a course like that. If you have some free resource out there that can help you get from low baseline of knowledge up to something that you can use, it could be very, very useful. Then there are MOOCs, massively forgot what the second O was. And massively open online courses. Usually you have to pay for those. I don't know why you would do that if you've already done all your courses and you can get the same content on YouTube. But anyway, books, like I said, single author monographs, conferences. So conferences it's actually easier to digest material in conferences, in my opinion, than it is to digest original research articles, because we have a way of understanding speech in a way that's easier than understanding writing. One time I took all of these lectures that I did, and I'm like, what if I could make pamphlets or a book out of this material? So I used Microsoft's online services, and I transcribed every one of these grad and postdoc talks that I did. And when I read the transcripts, and they were pretty accurate, but I was not speaking in sentences. I sounded like when you read a quote from like Trump, and nothing against Trump, but when you read a quote that's like a lot of words that don't make sense together, that's what my speech looked like when it was transcribed. And that's how most people's speech looks when it's transcribed, unless they go back through and edit it. Just to be politically neutral, even Obama, okay, and there's no way that I could use that as the basis for like a book, but I'm sure that people understood what I was saying, because our brain processes spoken language in a much more fluid way than it processes written language. So, conferences, people talking, easier to get the stuff, especially the first 5 minutes of every talk, where they tell you what has been done in the field, and you're like, great, I don't have to read that paper now. I know what it is now. So just going to a conference and sitting through, I know it takes a lot of fortitude to sit through a lot of talks, but it's worth it for those first few minutes at least of every talk, where they talk about where their work sits in the field, and by extension, where your work sits in the field. And then talking to people and asking them questions. So asking people questions makes them like you, and also asking people questions, you get to like steal their background knowledge, right? You can say, so what's the newest thing in this field? And they'll just tell you, because they like that you're asking them questions. So my work now is mechanical properties of organic semiconductors for applications in solar cells, wearable sensors, and mechanosensation haptics. I didn't have any course in any of that stuff. So this is how I learned what I need to know for what I do now. When you're studying yourself after you're done with courses, try to hold yourself to the same standards as you did when you were a student in a course. So like make flashcards, set a certain amount of time that you're going to read this book, and draw figures in the margins, ask questions in the book. So sometimes there are prep books. So the best, I don't know, a really good way to learn intro biology is to get some MCAT prep books. I can't tell you how valuable those have been to me in trying to learn about neurobiology and physiology, not having been a bio student myself. And then if you want to go past the MCAT, the U.S. medical licensing exam materials, you can get audiobooks and YouTube stuff and Khan Academy, and there's so much stuff out there if you treat it as though it were a class. And what you'll find is that after you've taken your last class and you want to learn something new, it can be really fun. It can be really fun to, like, every time you open this book, you're going to learn something new. Every time you open this review audiobook or something, you're going to learn something new. Now, a lot of times we have to teach others. We have to teach others in a formal setting, whether we are a TA or a mentor in a lab. And actually, our research can benefit a lot from teaching. So when we're teaching a course, you can recruit students from your classes to work with you. You can use knowledge learned in teaching to inform your research, and you learn the fundamentals better and you can apply it to your research. That fundamental stuff is actually useful. It's also true that the more you know, the more codified non-frontline research, the more knowledge, like crystallized knowledge you have in your brain, the more it's possible to learn. So a good example is there's an economist at George Mason University.
Is there something I can help you with?
No. There's an economist at George Mason University, Tyler Cowen, who's known for, among other things, as being a very fast reader. And he's able to kind of like go through nonfiction books pretty fast, like in a day, because there are big chunks of stuff that he already knows or can synthesize fairly quickly because he has such a big knowledge base already. And that is absolutely true. So someone asked him, how long did that book take you to read? And he'll tell them 60 years, because he's 60 and he's been learning that whole time, when really it took, a few hours or whatever. If you have the option to teach a course that you feel you would benefit from, then offer to teach that course. Like, you can tell the instructor, look, I can't tell you that this is going to work, but look, I didn't take this course as a student, but I know a lot about it from the research lab, but I really want to strengthen my fundamentals in it, and I would love to teach this for you. I'd even love to tutor it for you. And in doing that, you learn the depth of knowledge in a field or in a course that you wouldn't learn if you were just passively learning, taking notes, sitting there as a student, because it has to go through your brain, you have to synthesize it, you have to be able to explain it to somebody else. So in my own career, this happened when I taught nano or chemical engineering 134, as well as nano 202, intermolecular and surface forces. We've had several students go through the lab doing projects with molecular dynamics simulations. And there's no way that I would have been confident going in that research direction without having that baseline of knowledge. And in my own career as well, so I taught intermolecular and surface forces, specifically the chapter on friction. That led directly to the work that we've done in haptics. I've been able to collaborate with really great faculty members in other departments on haptics and human-machine interfaces, and even now the cellular mechanisms of mechanotransduction at the level of the ion channel, which has been really eye-opening to me. And it never would have happened if I didn't randomly get that teaching assignment when I started here, because the previous professor took a University of Colorado, poached her, and I got her a teaching assignment, and it totally changed my research trajectory. When you recruit students from the lab, or even when students come in and ask you questions during office hours, you get to absorb knowledge that they've absorbed. Their questions will actually stimulate research ideas in your own mind. And if they end up joining your lab, you get to share ideas in that way as well. So it goes the other way too. How can coursework that you're involved with benefit from research? You know how to put basic concepts into practice. So one of the advantages of being at an R1 institution is that the person in front of the class is at least, supposedly doing research at the cutting edge of their field. And then being a practitioner in the field helps you teach from the top down. What does that mean? So take general chemistry as an example of a course that's taught from the bottom up. You learn about pKa's and pH's and Lewis dot structures and maybe some molecular orbitals and Hund's rule and stuff, but no one tells you, what is the wall made out of? How are chemicals manufactured? How does, famous chemical products, how does the mRNA vaccine work? Not exactly, but in principle. And we're stuck here with titrations and pHs and the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. And as a result, when you go somewhere and you, like the dentist, what course is your college student? What course are you taking? Chemistry. Oh, I hated chemistry. Well, of course, because no one teaches you what it's good for. But if you're a practitioner in the field and you're teaching a course, then you can very easily reach into your pocket and explain to the students what your work is for. You also develop confidence, like when you are TAing or teaching or mentoring an undergraduate or a high school student or a grad student who's junior to you. You're an expert and you deserve to be holding the chalk or dry erase marker. And you can use specific pieces of information from the recent literature to update courses in real time. So if you're teaching a formal course and you're like, oh, this topic won the Nobel Prize this year, like bioorthogonal chemistry and click chemistry, very important for material science and bioengineering, that you can use that knowledge to update the literature or update the courses. And when you're a mentor or a teacher, you also serve as a role model. A lot of the people junior to you are junior to you, and they're in that space in part because they want to do eventually the kinds of stuff that you're doing. So here are some research tips at the intersection of research and coursework that are kind of like unsorted. Final things that I thought about. So when you are working in the lab, look for holes in the existing literature or from courses that you taught, or courses that you took. Like, I never got from that course why this happens. Let me see if anyone's done that. And if they haven't, that's an open research question. Focus on doing something new. Be wary of competition. I get really nervous when I see a lot of papers in a certain area. Like, I also get nervous when I see a lot of my papers get cited at too fast a rate. It's like, I don't want the field to be that crowded. I don't want there to be that many people biting at my tail fins. Monopolize your field. So monopolies in business are kind of regarded as a bad thing, but at the very beginning of a business or a new venture, you want to be able to say you're the only one doing that. It's not because you prevented other people from doing it, it's because you thought of doing it first. And you're de facto monopolizing the field, and you're able to capture all of the value and, let's say, to recognition that you get by doing that first, when no one else is doing it, right? A lot of people could be getting it, and you just happen to beat them to it, but the probability of that decreases linearly with the number of other people in the field. So like in trying to be in a position where you are the first to do something in a field of 100 other competitors, that's a losing strategy for like research innovation. That may sound difficult, but there's kind of an algorithmic way to do stuff that is new, and that is to work at the intersections between fields. So there are, so the work that I do involves organic materials chemistry, some mechanics, and some device engineering, and some even psychology, behavioral science. So let's say I'm 1 in 2 of somebody that knows something about psychology because I read the MCAT review manual on psychology. Then I'm 1 in 10 at somebody that knows something about organic chemistry, 1 in 5 of somebody that knows something about electronics, 1 in 10 of somebody that knows something about mechanics. That number for me would be not this good. I'm not that good in mechanics. But anyway, if you multiply all those denominators together, you get 1,000. And all of a sudden, if you're just okay at a bunch of different things and you do something that combines all those interests, then all of a sudden you're in the 99.9th percentile of somebody that can do something there. So actually this seems like, yeah, how are you going to monopolize your field? How are you going to do that? Well, if you develop a few interests and you're just okay at each one of them, it actually turns out, pretty good, because then you can be number 1 in that particular intersection of areas. Say no to a lot of things. So people are going to ask you, oh, I bet you could use your technique, your algorithm, your cell line, your mechanics model to help me. And be wary of that. I'm not saying you shouldn't be collaborative, but make sure that there's a give and take and that there's a non-zero sum interaction. Try to do things in-house to the extent possible. So if you have a project that will only work, if you can get this collaborator in this other lab that you've never talked to before, or that you have only a kind of a weak relationship with, to do something for you when their PI is kind of lukewarm about it and they may be lukewarm about it, then find another thing to do. It's not worth banging your head against a wall in a collaboration where the collaboration is mostly in one direction, where the concern is mostly in one direction. The way around this is with bottom-up collaboration. So the nice thing about when we can get together in person like this is that sometimes we can talk to each other, we learn about what we're doing, and say, oh, that might work, and I enjoy working with these people, and then you can develop a collaboration from the bottom up that doesn't involve like, I need this person to do something. It's like, we want to work together, and thus we're going to do something together. Don't waste your time with unresponsive people. If they don't respond to emails, there's just nothing there but trouble. There are plenty of things someone could be doing. That goes for professors that you want on your thesis committee too. You email them, they don't email you back in like a week, 2 weeks, forget it. Ask somebody else. And if they finally email you back, say, it's too late. Sorry. What are they going to do to you? Use instrument time to help manage your schedule. So a lot of times there will be a spot open in the SEM or the supercomputer or the specific piece of equipment in your own field that's hard to get access to. And that will actually automatically like anchor the time that you have to prepare your work to use that instrument. Finally, there's a nice intersection of coursework and formal learning with the publishing aspect of research. So I was doing a panel on how to combine teaching, research, and service. And the first question I got asked was, how do you publish high-impact papers? Which was not really related to the talk, but I tried to answer it the best I could, and I made a slide out of it afterwards. So my answer was, do good research. And what does that mean? That it's thorough, scholarly, you're citing all the right people, you're making friends with people, or rather you're not making enemies with people by not citing the people that did the work. Even if that work didn't directly influence you, if it's similar and they see it and you didn't cite them and they get your paper, they're not going to review it favorably. I mean, this is just like human, unless they're a saint, right? They could be a saint, in which case you'll be fine. But it is up to you to use the keywords in your own paper to search. And if there's a similar paper out there, even if it didn't lead to the publication of your paper, you have to acknowledge it. Instructive. So your papers should instruct somebody of the results, whether it's a method or a mechanism they want to, or a device. You want it to be something that people will follow, and you want it to be useful. And that doesn't mean that it's a new device or drug that's going to solve some societal problem immediately. It could be useful to the research community. And research kind of works like a pyramid, not a pyramid scheme, although there are those aspects too. But research works like a pyramid where the stuff that makes it out to affect society, like RNA, lipid, nanoparticle vaccines, has as its basis this whole range of molecular biology, of surfactant engineering, of microfluidics, and everything like that. Think about why you want to publish your results. So you need a line on your CV. You need a line on your CV that says Cell or Nature or Science. I don't think you need it to say those things. There are a lot of reasons why you need to publish your results. There's the archival aspect. So you want people to be able to find your work. You want yourself to be able to find your work. You want to put something on your CV or your resume when you get a job. You want to publish your results to teach others or change their behavior. That might seem a little like cynical or manipulative. Why am I publishing something to change their behavior? It's like, of course you're trying to change their behavior. You want them to use your technique, right? Or you want them to know the mechanism you discovered so that it can inform their research. People are very vulnerable in the sense that whether we agree with it or not, we retain everything, like little bits of every bit of incoming, right? Everything we read affects the way we do stuff. We read something in our field, it affects the way we think about how we're going to do things. It's all a matter of degree. Sometimes you need it to get a grant or a fellowship. So a lot of times you don't care whether the paper is in science or sensors and actuators Q, no such thing. But you don't care if it's in an impact factor 40 or an impact factor 1.06 journal. You just need it to have the stamp of peer review so that it's a published chunk of stuff you can use as the basis to do something else professionally. Don't get obsessed about the impact factor or prestige of journals. I have not a single science or nature paper on my CV. I have a couple of science blank, nature blank papers, but not that many. If you don't get it into where you want it to be, solicit a review or perspective article. So this is the back door into a lot of journals. I am submitting a paper to Science today, but it is a commentary on another paper. But on my CV, it will say, Darren Lipomi, Science 2022. And yes, if somebody were to open it up, they'll see that it's a commentary, but it still gets your thoughts out there, right? And you still get to talk about aspects of the work that are important to you. Oh yeah, the last bullet that I don't have written here, but I just thought about it. You also want to, if you publish in a journal that's less high of an impact factor than you wanted, but then you go to a conference and you get a good slot and you speak to an audience of this size, this is easily the same number of people that are going to read it in a high impact journal, really read it in a high impact journal. And since you published it, you don't have to worry about getting scooped. So it's a lot more important to have it out there than to wait and wait and wait and do more and more and more and more stuff just to increase that impact factor. Finally, some thoughts about dealing with, I said finally a lot, dealing with peer reviewers and how it might relate to courses. So in classes, we're used to taking exams and equations. Equations are kind of hard. In difficulty, but also it's like a fact. It usually has an answer, usually has a solution. In publishing, you're dealing with humans, and dealing with humans is fluffy and psychological. So submitting a paper is a lot like a psychology experiment. Remember that if you get poor reviews, the reviewers are not trying to destroy your career. They might just not have had coffee that day. You get a free reaction, even if it's a bad reaction. It didn't cost you anything, at least in terms of money, to get that reaction. And you get free consulting by a presumed expert in the field. So think about the consulting rate of a professor. If a company wants to hire me to do something, not me, say some generic professor, because usually I don't do it, but if it's a generic professor and they're really an expert in something, I'm at most 1/10 of an expert in anything, so no one would want to hire me for this stuff. But if someone's really an expert in something, and they might get paid $500 an hour to consult for something, but you got an hour of their time to read your paper that some journal made them review, otherwise with the coercion that if they didn't review that paper, the editor would look badly upon them in the for future submissions. So that's why they reviewed it. But you got their opinion for free, and that's like free consulting. On average, as mad as you are about the reviews you get back from your papers, the changes that we make in response to those reviews tend to improve the papers. Make a change to the manuscript in response to as many comments as possible. Don't just use the rebuttal letter as a chance to argue with the reviewers, because they're not going to be convinced. They're not going to be convinced unless you actually made an effort to explain it to the other people who will be reading the paper, right? If it's just, no, the reviewer's wrong because of this and this and this, they're going to get it back and they're going to say, well, expletive you, I'm not the only one that's going to feel that way. If you're still mad, write a fake response letter where you curse out the reviewers and make sure that you don't send that one and file it away. So in summary, the models of training undergrads versus grad students couldn't be more different. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about how to be successful in courses earlier on in our academic career, but we don't often think about how to apply the same sort of metacognitive strategies to how to do a good job in research, how to be an effective researcher. Going from courses to research represents a big life change. Coursework is not required to work with your hands, but it is required to know what you're doing or to understand the literature or to answer questions in a seminar or to avoid rediscovering thermodynamics. Teaching can be helpful to research. You are forced to really learn the fundamentals. You get good ideas. You can explain your results more effectively. Don't let the fact that you're a researcher and you're putting a lot of hours into the lab stop you from doing formal learning. You don't need a class to learn. You can take your learning strategies that you've picked up in coursework to independent studies that are self-driven. And finally, maybe someday your research will be taught in a class. So thank you very much. Happy to have any discussion.